Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. Going to be talking about what we learned about the Orioles and the All-Star Game. Before we get into the episode, Bet Online is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% free bet credit for your first deposit up to $250, and bet online. The game starts here. All right. So a lot of controversy has come out in the last couple days. I'm recording this Monday night. I'm a little behind schedule here, but I am recording this Monday night, and the Orioles are, well, first off, before I get into that and the All-Star game, I will just say the Orioles took 2 out of 3 from the A's. That's not the big headline, but the Orioles did suffer our worst loss throughout the course of the season. In Game 2, we lost 19-8. Cade Povich had a really rough outing. So it was the worst loss to the season, worst loss, apologies, of the season in terms of both runs allowed and by losing by the amount of runs. So we lost 19-8, losing by uh, 11 runs. And the worst loss prior to this one that the Orioles had, you have to go all the way back to April 12th of this year, and the Orioles lost to the Brewers 11-1. So we lost by 10 runs that game. The offense wasn't as good that game, but we also gave up 11 runs as opposed to 19. And 19 sounds and feels way worse than 11. Yes, they're both in double digits, and that's really bad. But you see a score of 11, more or less somewhat regularly in baseball. But 19 is really sort of an outlier. So giving up 19 runs in a game, more than on average 2 runs per inning, that's really bad. And so the Orioles went through that, but were able to bounce back in Game 3 to win the series. Pretty wild that the Orioles lose a game 19-8, but still somehow managed to take the series. So yeah, anyway, so that did happen, but that is not going to be the focus of this episode. We have bigger news to cover. We found out information about the All-Star game. So this is not going to be an All-Star game preview. Hopefully, we're going to have all three of us on for the Home Run Derby preview and the All-Star game preview. I don't know if those are going to be separate episodes or the same episodes, or I don't know about that. But yeah, I don't know what's exactly going to happen, but we're going to be trying to get on together to discuss it because the All-Star game is big deal. So all right, so this is not a All-Star game preview. This is not predictions. This is not which of our players is going to do really well. Is it going to be Gunnar Henderson or Adley Rutschman that wins the MVP of the game, the All-Star Game MVP? Um, but I am going to be talking about the Orioles that will be going, and sort of more be focusing on the Orioles that will not be going to the All-Star Game, and try to make sense out of this. There are a lot of really, in many ways, rightfully upset Oriole fans. Perhaps Oriole fans are even angry. I'm not sure as much about that, but definitely upset, definitely disappointed. And I am here, and I'm going to try to the best of my ability to make sense of it, see what feels fair, see what feels not fair, what is right and what is not right, and to try to dissect these sorts of things. Even though I am an Orioles fan, I will try to be as fair as possible throughout this process. So, the All-Star game will be held in Arlington, Texas, in the Rangers Stadium. So as I sort of hinted at, uh, the three Orioles that will be in attendance, and I think they were pretty surefire uh, prior to the initiation of this process. I think it was pretty clear that these three Orioles were pretty much locks for heading to the All-Star game, and they are headed. So it's going to be Gunnar Henderson. He is going to be the starting shortstop, which is really, really exciting. It's going to be Adley Rutschman, who will also be the starting catcher. So that will be really cool to see as well. And then Corbin Burns is going to make the All Star team as well. So it's going to be those three. As I said, they were pretty much locks coming into the All Star game. I don't think there was really any doubt about any of them making the All Star game. But with that said, it does feel like the Orioles are one of the best teams in baseball. Is it really right that we are only sending three players to the MLB All-Star game? I don't know about that. It doesn't feel right. It definitely does not feel right. And it feels like with this caliber of team, we should have a lot of All-Stars. We certainly have uh could be all stars. We have Cedric Mullins out in center field, who, given different circumstances, given a different year, could be an all star. He has been an all star in the past. He also did play for Team USA in the World Baseball Classic. We also had coming into the season Kyle Bradish, who, if he had stayed healthy, he was delayed a little bit returning to the rotation, and then of course he got injured again. But it felt like he might have had a good chance to make the All Star game. But even beyond that, right? Ryan O'Hearn, Ryan Mountcastle both came very close to making the All Star game, but they will not be in attendance. Grayson Rodriguez, as I said, now he's a very good pitcher. Don't get me wrong. He probably will be an all star at one point in his career. And he has a fantastic win-loss record. I'm gonna get into all that. Um, but maybe you could imagine sort of an outside scenario where even looking at like the numbers this year, you could I mean, it's hard to justify, I will say that, for Grayson Rodriguez getting into the All-Star game. But maybe coming into the year, you had a lot of confidence and hope that he could be an All-Star this year. That was definitely a possibility, and it was definitely on the table coming into the season. Um, and then you can also sort of look at Anthony Santander out in right field. Now, I'll get into the specifics about, whether each of them should have gone. And then, of course, this was a big source of frustration among Oriole fans as well. Jordan Westberg was a possibility. I think a very strong possibility. And then also, this was also really sort of, I think, what felt really unjustifiable to, I know, the people on our podcast, but also um, many Oriole fans, was Craig Kimbrell is not going to the All-Star game in favor of another player who is seemingly just worse. So I will get into all that. I will try to break all of that down. So, yeah. So first, I'm gonna sort of talk about guys who, I think, who are not going. So I'll start sort of in the order, or I will go sort of in the order that I talked about. So I'll talk about Grayson Rodriguez first. So if you look at his numbers here, Grayson Rodriguez has a 3.52 ERA, 107 ERA plus. He's pitched 94 innings and has 100 to be exact, I will clarify. He's pitched 94 and 2/3 innings, and he has 105 strikeouts, a 26.5% K percentage. So anyway, and he has just overall, he has a 1.3 WAR. Now, if you look at some of the other pitchers that are going to the All-Star game, now they're more than who I'm about to mention, but you can look at Garrett Crochet, you can look at Cole Reagans, you can look at the person I mentioned earlier, Grayson Rodriguez's teammate, Corbin Burns, and you can look at like Logan Gilbert, for instance, right? So all of them just very surface level. All of them have a WAR over 2.5. Grayson Rodriguez has a 1.3 WAR. And all of them also have yeah, so all of them also have ERAs that are less than Grayson Rodriguez's. Grayson, out of that collective, has the highest ERA of the bunch. He has a 3.52 ERA, Crochet 3.08, Reagan's 3.28, and then Gilbert and Burns both sub 3 ERAs. So where does Grayson Rodriguez stand out in those midst of numbers? Now, unfortunately, he sort of stands out in the least indicative category of a pitcher's performance and ability. So Grayson Rodriguez has 11-3 record. So he is racking up wins, which is really good from like a team perspective because he's doing exactly what we need him to do in order to produce W's in the win column for the Orioles. For the most part, maybe that's a little generalized, but overall, if you're getting wins, you're doing enough for the team. Now, maybe on the days you happen to pitch, you happen to get a lot of run support. If you're someone like Corbin Burns, on the days you happen to pitch, you happen to get no run support. But overall, he's still doing sort of what he needs to do to win ball games for us. Corbin Burns is close behind him. He has a 9-3 record, so also very, very good. But if you look at the other win-loss records, Crochet has a 6-6 record. Reagan's has a 5-6 record, and Logan Gilbert is 5-5. So if you add up Crochet, Reagan's, and Logan Gilbert's win-loss record, they have more losses than wins, just by one. But they have more losses than wins. So that I think right there sort of shows how baseball is sort of phasing out win-loss record in regards to its importance and relevance. So, when we were growing up, you used to think about win-loss record as, oh, you want a 20-game winner. Well, today, not a lot of guys win 20 games. And if they do, it's going to be very much a product of a team that player is on more than how good they are, right? Somebody could have a 2.5 ERA or a 180 ERA, and you will probably get some wins if you have a 180 ERA. But if you don't have run support, and if you have a bullpen that blows leads and blows games for you, your win-loss record is not going to be favorable or positive. So wins and losses are not a great metric to assess a starting pitcher in particular, but most maybe with relievers, it's a little more indicative. But a lot of times maybe that's not even true either, because a lot of times relievers come into games, give up the lead, and then their team gets it right back, and then they're out of the game, and the rest of the bullpen does their job and holds the game right there. So and you sort of get an undeserved win in that situation. I actually remember a game, I think it was Familia for the Mets a long time ago. Uh it was really funny actually. I think he had come into a game where I think he was coming in the ninth inning in a game that was like 5-0, and he pitched through the inning, but I think gave up 5 runs, like quote unquote blew the save, but he didn't get a blown save because it wasn't a save opportunity, because it was more than the 3-run threshold that is used to qualify you for a save. So he came in, gave up the 5 runs, and then the Mets walked it off, I think, in the bottom half of the inning. So he got the win. He just, got to, didn't suffer any of the consequences. Now, granted, his ERA suffered the consequences, but his saves and save opportunities, that sort of thing, that was completely unblemished, right? So, save and blown saves. He didn't have to blow a save, even though he did way worse than, what a normal blown save would have been. So anyway, that's a little tangent, but he got to skate off and, enjoy the day with a win. So anyway, little side note. So anyway, Grayson Rodriguez, yeah, there's not a lot here that also would really put him in sort of the running for being really thought of as an all-star besides the win-loss record. He also has not even hit 100 innings yet, which each of the other guys have innings pitched. So obviously he had the injury for a bit. So that's sort of the first guy to get out of the way. Now, there wasn't a lot of discussion about Grayson Rodriguez coming in, or there wasn't a lot of frustration that why is Grayson Rodriguez not an all-star? But I just sort of wanted to cast a wide net here and sort of consider all the possibilities, and sort of what we were looking at. So I think it's fair that Grayson Rodriguez is not headed to the All-Star game, but I will look forward to seeing him there in the future. All right, so I'll sort of talk about these two players a little bit in conjunction with each other, Ryan O'Hearn and Ryan Mountcastle. So they are a little different because even though they do both play first base, Ryan O'Hearn was competing against Yordan Alvarez for starting first baseman. Uh, did I say that right? I'm sorry. No, I did not say that right. So Ryan O'Hearn was competing against Yordan, right, for DH. And Ryan Mountcastle was competing against Vlad Guerrero Jr. for starting first base. So unfortunately, this is about, the all-star voting and how this sort of works. So unsurprisingly, in large part because of name recognition, but also because of sort of the merit and what each of these guys have done over the course of the year. Both Jordan and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. both beat out O'Hearn and Mountcastle to start in the All Star game. Uh, but what's interesting about that is, yes, even though you get beat out for the starting role, you're not automatically added to the roster. And they both suffered a difficult fate because neither of them won the starting position. And then, unfortunately, neither of them ended up making the All Star team either. So, sort of getting into it a little bit more. So trying to figure out if I should start with Mountcastle or start with O'Hearn or how exactly I should talk about this. But I guess what I would say is we can look at Ryan O'Hearn first. So O'Hearn so this was, as far as like the starting role goes, O'Hearn really, it's arguably, it's a little insulting to Jordan to have O'Hearn sort of be in the conversation for starting DH with Jordan Alvarez. So, for anyone who doesn't know, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I absolutely love Jordan Alvarez as a player, as a hitter predominantly. Obviously, he's a DH mainly. He does play a little bit in left field. I don't know how much he's done that this year, but in the past, he has done a little bit of left field. And I think that yeah, I just say it's a little insulting because if you look at the numbers, Jordan is far outpacing Ryan O'Hearn. So Jordan has a 2.7 WAR relative to Ryan O'Hearn's 1.8, and Alvarez has an OPS more than 100 points over Ryan O'Hearn's. He has Alvarez 927 and O'Hearn 812. So O'Hearn's, yeah. So, you know, when we're looking at hitting, right, that's going to be a really big factor. If you sort of even look at like a more superficial stat, and, we will be talking about home runs because, theoretically, like that normally does sort of have sway. I'm going to talk about a guy here in a minute who made the All Star team. And I think a lot of that had to do with just his raw home run numbers. But if you look at uh yeah, if you look at the raw home run numbers, Alvarez has 19 home runs, doing great, and Ryan O'Hearn has 11. Now, it's not exactly a fair comparison, and I think this is really where O'Hearn uh has difficulty in a competition like this, making a potential All-Star game. Jordan has 374 plate appearances this year, and O'Hearn has only 270. So it's, more than 100 less. It's 104 less plate appearances than Jordan. And this is in large part because Rhino Hearn, he plays most days, but he normally will not get in the lineup against lefties. And that's going to have a big consequence for sort of your ability to, rack up a WAR, rack up home runs, and rack up these stats, that have sort of big implications when we get to assessing who's going to be making an all-star team. If you look uh yeah, so that is like a really big and consequential thing for him, where most guys, most all-stars, especially most starting all-stars in the league, they're everyday players, right? You're not going to sit Jordan Alvarez if Cole Reagans is on the mound, right? Or any other really good lefty in the league. Jordan is going to be in that lineup no matter what, unless he's getting a rest day. That would be the only situation, or he's hurt. That would be, or maybe he's on the bereavement list. I guess there are a few possibilities. But overall, if Jordan is available to play, no matter who that pitcher is, he's going to be in that lineup. And part of what has been so great about like how Brandon Hyde has utilized Ryan O'Hearn, even though, right, he's not playing every day, even though he's not in the lineup every single day, it speaks volumes that he's been able to sort of been utilized effectively to be put in situations where he's going to be successful. And I think maybe if he's in the lineup against lefties, maybe he has a couple more home runs or hits every day, but the production in those games is certainly going to drop. His OPS is probably going to not be nearly as good as his very solid 812 OPS is, etc. So I have no objections with how the Orioles are using him and utilizing him on the roster, but we're trying to win games, not send Ryan O'Hearn to the All-Star game at all costs. So that's like a really unfortunate thing sort of for him that is really going to that really impedes, I guess, his ability this year and even in future years to make an All-Star game. So that was one thing that really stood out with Ryan O'Hearn. Now, the guy I was talking about, where I think the raw home run numbers had a lot to do, or at least a good amount to do, with him making the All-Star team, was Josh Naylor. Now, I'm not saying he's undeserving, but Naylor is a guy that doesn't have a lot of defensive value. In fact, if you look at just their WAR numbers between Naylor and Mountcastle, Mountcastle has 1.7 and Naylor has 1.1. Now, a lot of that is attributed to the defensive value that each of them bring, because offensively, Naylor has definitely been better this year. Naylor has 21 home runs relative to Mountcastle's 12, and at this point in the season, we will talk about Santander, and I will talk about Santander in a few minutes, but because he does have Santander has over 20 home runs. But yeah, when you see Naylor have 21 home runs, it's sort of eye popping at this point. Naylor has an 813 OPS, which is a lot better than Mountcastle's, which is at 766. Now, yeah, so in any case, yeah, but overall, if you're looking at like WAR, which is supposed to sort of encapsulate how good is this player overall, Mountcastle is like half a WAR, 0.6 tenths of a game better than Naylor is. So even though the offensive numbers don't reflect that. So yeah, it is sort of now against Vlad Guerrero Jr., it's sort of a different situation. Now, Vlad got off to, a very slow start this year. It's always sort of curious to me why a little bit why Vlad Guerrero Jr. is not better than he is. He's always very good. But I've sort of been waiting for him for a long time to sort of take the game, take sort of, especially his offensive game to the next level. And he sort of hasn't done that yet. And compared to Vlad Guerrero Jr., Vlad Guerrero Jr. has 2.5 WAR compared to Mountcastle's 1.7. And yeah, in OPS, Guerrero's is even better than Naylor's at 830. So, and the home run numbers are about the same with Guerrero and Mountcastle, 13 to 12. Um, yeah, and Guerrero has, I mean, to Mountcastle's credit, he has had, a bit more plate appearances and more opportunity to hit home runs. It's sort of the same thing with Alvarez. Like Guerrero is not going to be taken out of the lineup where sometimes Mountcastle is. So it's kind of an unfortunate thing there. But so it's sort of difficult and it might be tough for Oriole fans to swallow. And, when thinking about each of these guys, they're not really players where the All-Star game is conducive for them making it, which is tough and it's difficult. And it's also just, I would say, not conducive for the Orioles to send guys to the All-Star game because how much we do shuffle guys around and this sort of thing. So but yeah, so with O'Hearn and with Mountcastle, I don't think it's that unfortunate or that much of an injustice that either of them aren't going. Uh, but especially for guys who are hoping that Mountcastle will eventually make an All-Star game and that sort of thing. It's tough that he wasn't able to sort of capitalize on his opportunity that came up for him this year. So moving on to Anthony Santander, I'll talk about him next. So I will say, if we're looking at the outfield for the American League outfield is absolutely stacked. Aaron Judge, Stephen Kwan, and Juan Soto are going to be starting in the outfield. That's a really, really difficult outfield to crack. And then even if you go to the reserves for the outfield, you look at Kyle Tucker and you see Riley Green and you see Jaron Duran. So yeah, so basically the three of them, it's a bit difficult. So if you look sort of at them comprehensively. Now, comparing Santander to the first three I mentioned is just, he doesn't have any chance of cracking that. That is just off the table. Because Juan Soto, Judge, and Stephen Kwan. I don't know if people have been following Stephen Kwan this year. Of course, everyone knows about how just ridiculous Aaron Judge and Juan Soto are. But Stephen Kwan this year has been almost equally as ridiculous. Now, ridiculous in a different way. Um, Judge, of course, with the home runs, and Soto with his 21 home runs. I think Judge has 32, just a ridiculous pace right now. But so even if you take that out of it, well, Stephen Kwan has 9 home runs this year, but he's not going to the All-Star game because of his power. He's going to the All-Star game basically because of everything else. He has an OPS of 956 despite having just 9 home runs. Yeah, his slugging is 538. His on base percentage is a ridiculous 419. And just to contextualize this, 419 is an absolutely ridiculous on base percentage. Now, granted, Juan Soto has a 430 on base percentage. the fact that Steven Kwan is so close to Juan Soto's on base percentage is just insanity because Juan Soto sometimes will go 0 for 1 with 2 walks in a game or 3 walks in a game, right? He walks a ridiculous amount of the time. Yeah, in any case, Juan Soto, I mean, he's always had an on base percentage around 400, and Stephen Kwan has a 419 on base percentage. I mean, 400 in of itself is outstanding, like absolutely outstanding. 380, 370 are really, really, really good on base percentages. And Steven Kwan is just blowing that out of the water. So, lot of credit to him. So that outfield is just pretty, I mean, sort of untouchable in a way. And when you go to the reserves, it also is sort of a difficult pathway for Santander to get in that, and he wasn't able to, unfortunately. Now, what I will say about Santander is he has 23 home runs this year. And other than Aaron Judge, so Santander is tied for the fourth most home runs in the American League. And he also has uh so he has 23 home runs, which is more than Soto's. And he had 15. I'm sorry, no, I think it was 13 in June, which is, yeah, I think it was 13 in June because I just did an episode on this. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 13 in June because I think 15 was the record. Um, yeah, I'm like nearly positive of that. But yeah, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure. So he had 13 in June. So he just sort of came alive and like tore it up in June. And, it is sort of interesting if things had been rearranged in Santander's life a little bit. And let's say he hit those 13 home runs that he hit in June in May, how would that have impacted fan voting? you know, how would people be assessing sort of him as a player, as a hitter? Now, as a player overall, Santander really suffers uh, because of his defensive value. It's something we've talked about. Santander on a different team could very well be a DH, but he has a 1.9 WAR, and if we're looking at even Riley Green, Jaron Duran, and Kyle Tucker, who are the three reserve outfielders, all of them have a WAR over 3, and Santander's is 1.9. So Santander didn't even crack 2, and this is, of course, attributed, as I said, to his defensive value. Now, if we're also looking at Santander, his OPS is 800, which is, out of Riley Green, Jaron Duran, Stephen Kwan, Kyle Tucker, Juan Soto, and Aaron Judge. His 803 OPS is the worst of them all. Now, Jaron Duran is just 813, but Jaron Duran is ridiculous in a lot of ways. I mean, okay, maybe I'm overusing this word ridiculous. But he's been very, very good in a lot of ways, in large part because of his defensive ability, in large part because of his base running ability. He has 21 stolen bases this year. So, yeah, Jaron Duran is a really, really good player. And yeah, he has a WAR that is equivalent to Juan Soto's at 4.6. So, if you're looking sort of at this, yes, Santander has a high home run number, but sort of how else is he standing out with his numbers relative to these other guys? And he's unfortunately not really doing that. Now, Anthony Santander has been around the league for a while. He's probably having maybe a slightly better year offensively than he has had in the past. Maybe with the home run numbers a lot better offensively, at least up until this point in the season. But um, his 803 OPS, a lot of times he's in the high 700s. But he's sort of, you know, thought about as a guy who, if he puts together a good year, could be in this all-star conversation. So it is frustrating a little bit that, he is getting older. Now he might still make an all-star game. He has a shot to do that in the future. But he's sort of been a perennial, very good player, maybe not quite an all-star. And for a lot of Oriole fans, especially, he's like one of I think he is uh, again, don't quote me on this, but I think he's the longest, he's been on the Orioles team for the longest time of any current player. Um, so it'd be great to be able to get him to an All-Star game at some point in his career. And this might be his last opportunity to do it for the Orioles because he is a free agent at the end of the year. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Orioles don't re-sign him. So I think that is a possibility, and I do think it is something the Orioles need to um, yeah, the Orioles can evaluate that and think about that potentially in the future, re-signing him. But it is sort of a disappointment for Oriole fans that he's not going to be headed to the All-Star game potentially as an Oriole throughout his career. So that's kind of unfortunate, and especially his month of June, which was, for the ages. The fact that that wasn't able to catapult him into the All-Star game is difficult to hear. He did get off to like a really sort of slow start. Uh, so you know, the his hot month of June was sort of offset a little bit by the other months that he struggled. But with that said, um, you know, it is still. I think it doesn't, you know, eliminate the emotional part of it that we really do wish that Santander was able to get to an All Star game. Now, the other sort of factor that you could consider for him is that he gets to go to the home run derby. The 22 home runs, as I said, is seemingly worthy of him being in the home run. I'm sorry, the 23 home runs is seemingly worthy of him being in the home run derby. Um, but uh, but yeah, so it's just yeah, it's unfortunate. Hopefully he can make the home run derby, and that would be really exciting to watch. And he does have, like, the ball does sort of just jump off his bat a lot of the time. So I think I wouldn't have him as a favorite on my initial thought to win the home run derby, but I think he could make some noise there and it'd be exciting to watch him. The ball does, yeah, just jump off his bat in a lot of ways and at moments. So yeah, so it'd be great if he was able to do that. But yeah, Santander unfortunately not headed to the All-Star game. Yeah, so the next one to talk about, and maybe I'll speed up a little bit here. I think I've been going for a bit, but so this one, I think the Orioles have at least some valid frustration for sort of how the system uh selects and decides upon players. So Jordan Westberg is not going to be headed to the All-Star game either. And the one that got in over him was Isaac Paredes for the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, I mean, I think the large reason that Paredes is going to the All-Star game instead of Jordan Westberg is because the Rays are not sending anybody else. So Isaac Paredes is the Tampa Bay Rays representative in the All-Star game. With that said, if you're comparing their numbers, it is a little bit difficult to justify Paredes going to the All-Star game if you were looking at them in a vacuum and not factoring in, the teams and how you have to fit the pieces of the puzzle together in order to make the All-Star game work. If you're not thinking about that and you're just saying, hey, which of these two guys is more deserving, I think it's difficult not to come to the conclusion that it is certainly Westberg. Westberg has a 2.8 WAR relative to Paredes' 1.9. So he's almost a game better than Paredes in the WAR category. So they both have the same home run totals. They both have 14. And so, I mean, if you look at OPS, Westberg does have an edge in OPS. He has an 835 OPS relative to Paredes's 820. So, yeah, it's sort of, and then if you now, yeah, if you look at the OPS plus, that's where um Westberg is at 139 and Paredes at 134. So yeah, so basically I do think this one yeah, and especially, this also relates to the defensive value. If you think about the defense, I think the gap between Westberg and Paredes becomes even wider. But if you're sort of looking at the offensive number, if you're getting into this OPS number, there is a little bit of a disparity between the two of them. Um, so Westberg basically gets on base less than Paredes. Paredes has a better on base percentage, but basically Westberg does more damage when he hits the ball than Paredes. So Westberg has a slugging percentage over 500 over the course of the year, which is really good. And Paredes is at 462. So now, granted, Paredes does edge out in on base percentage, does edge out Westberg 358 to 328. So they're somewhat comparable offensively. And I think that if you are strictly looking at the offensive numbers, I think it's pretty even, but that you give the edge to Westberg. Now, also, if you're thinking about base running, Westberg runs a little bit. He has 6 steals this year, and Paredes has 0. So, yeah. And then if you think about the defense, though, that's really, I think, where uh, Westberg really begins to sort of separate himself as an overall player relative to Paredes. So in any case, so that one, yeah. Now with that said, is it, you know, given that the Rays have to send a representative, how egregious is it that it turns out to be Paredes and Westberg is the one that is on the sidelines? That I am not as comfortable sort of giving a declarative answer to. I think it is really unfortunate that, you know, guys don't get sort of the recognition that they deserve because of how this sort of goes. I mean, who knows? Like, you never know when each of these guys, it's going to be their last opportunity for the All-Star game. So when you're sort of comparing numbers and it comes out to be that, you know, one guy is much better, but because of the system and that sort of thing, someone else goes in their place. Well, they might never get that opportunity again. And, no player can take it for granted. Oh, I'll just get the All-Star game next year. No problem. That's, never how it works. Um, and just thinking about it a little bit more, now Jose Ramirez, I mean, I think it is pretty indisputable that Ramirez should be headed to the All-Star game over Jordan Westberg as a starter. They have pretty comparable WAR, but Ramirez, he does have more home runs, and he does have a slightly higher OPS. But sort of this, I mean, this is the other sort of difficult thing with how this is done is just, you know, Jose Ramirez gets an edge because he's been a really good player for a long time and the fans really like him and he's a well-known name. And I like Jose Ramirez, don't get me wrong. But he's a very well-known name. And, so even if Jordan Westberg was, more directly comparable to Jose Ramirez, even if he did have maybe even slightly better numbers, it's very possible Jose Ramirez would still be going instead of Westberg just because of the reputation, because of the time spent in the league, because Ramirez at this point is a veteran of the game, etc. So The one other thing that you could kind of look at too, so Jordan Westberg was competing against Ramirez at the position of third base, but Marcus Simeon at second base, which is a position Westberg has played a bit this year, has also kind of very much struggled offensively. Now, similar to other guys, he's very good defensively. But Simeon has really struggled offensively. He only has a 673 OPS this year, which, maybe other guys can, skate by with that OPS, but especially for an all-star and especially for someone of Simeon's caliber, that's a very down year for him by his standards. But Simeon is going to the all-star game as a reserve over Westberg. So that's also kind of frustrating and kind of difficult, and again speaks back to sort of the system and how these things are decided. Now, moving on to sort of the last player that I think Oriole fans have a very, very righteous grievance about is Craig Kimbrell. Now, Craig Kimbrell, there are certainly guys in the All-Star game that got there rightfully so over Craig Kimbrell. Emmanuel Clase is having an unreal year. He's just been absolutely incredible. There's no denying that. He has a 2.3 WAR as a closer, which is absurd, absolutely absurd. He has a microscopic 0.85 ERA. And I actually don't have it in front of me, but I think that actually maybe I do have it in front of me. Yes. Clase has a 0.63 whip. I guess maybe 0.64 if you're rounding up. But that is just an insane whip. He also he leads the league in saves. He has 27. So, Oriole fans were not saying, why is Class A going? Kimbrel should be there. No, we were not. We were more looking at the selection of the commissioner, who chose to, instead of sending Craig Kimbrel to the All-Star game, decided to send Clay Holmes to the All-Star game. Now, other people have talked about this and this direct comparison. And if you're looking at their numbers, it is very, very sort of inexcusable why Clay Holmes is going to the All-Star game over Craig Kimbrell. Now, if you want to come and argue to me that, okay, yes, it shouldn't be Clay Holmes. Clay Holmes should not be in the All-Star game, but Craig Kimbrell should not be in the All-Star game either. That is an argument that I could entertain, because there are other very, very good relievers in the league that have a case to make it to the All-Star game. Now, I'm not advocating that Yennier Cano make the All-Star game this year or that he should have, but Yennier Cano leads the league in holds. Now, arguably, that is very much a stat, sort of like saves. Cano leads the league in holds in large part because he's on a very good baseball team, the Orioles, that have put him in positions to come in the eighth inning, the seventh inning with a league and to record a hold, right? But you can also look at guys like Carlos Estevez and Andres Munoz that also have very good cases to go to the All-Star game. So if anyone listening wants to make that argument to me that no, yeah, Clay Holmes should definitely not be going, I agree with you on that. But Kimbrel, I would have taken this other guy over Kimbrel, or I would have taken Munoz over Kimbrel. I can entertain arguments like that, but I cannot entertain the argument that Clay Holmes should be there over Craig Kimbrel. So, and I know we tweeted something out about this, little behind the scenes note to everybody. That was Eli that tweeted that out. But so if you're looking at Clay Holmes, you're looking at Craig Kimbrel. So, Clay Holmes really this year, he really only stands out or sort of separates himself from the rest of the pack of relievers in the saves category. So if you're sort of privileging saves, I can see an argument for why you might be tempted or consider sending Clay Holmes to the All-Star game. But if you are privileging saves as a statistic and you're emphasizing that as a statistic, uh, Craig Kimbrell has 23 saves relative to Holmes's 19. So Kimbrell is beating Clay Holmes in the saves category, right? So that's one part of it, right? If you look at just all the stats, right? If you look at ERA, Kimbrell 2.10 ERA, Clay Holmes 3 ERA. Um, let's see here. I was going to go to whip, but I actually don't have whip in front of me at the moment. But I would imagine Craig Kimbrell has a lower whip than Class A. And then if you look at strikeout percentage, which is also like, especially for a closer, you want power. You want that guy that's going to come in, that's going to get strikeouts. So do they have comparable K percentages? Absolutely not. Craig Kimbrell has a 38.5% K percentage relative to Clay Holmes's 23.9% Clay percentage. No, not Clay percentage, strikeout percentage. So Kimbrell has 52 this year, and Holmes has 37. Kimbrell has pitched in 34 and a third innings, and Holmes in 36. So Holmes has a very negligible edge in innings pitched, and Kimbrell is wiping the floor with him in ERA, K percentage, strikeouts, and saves. I will say that as far as saves go, I said he's wiping the floor with him in saves. He is 4 saves in a saves category at this point in the year is a big difference and distinction between the two players. If you want to look at blown saves, Holmes has 5 blown saves. Kimbrell only has 4. So I would love any Yankee fan who might be out there who's listening, give me an actual good, solid, real argument for why Clay Holmes should be heading to the All-Star game over Craig Kimbrell. Oh, well, maybe. Well, Clay Holmes is a veteran, sort of like the case I was making about Ramirez. He's been around the game for a long time. He has a very good reputation. Very true. Like he has been around the game a long time. He's a solid reliever, et cetera, et cetera. Craig Kimbrell has been an elite closer throughout the course of his career. This year, he is like elevated past many people in the all-time saves list. He's in the 400s. He is going, he is definitely in Hall of Fame consideration. So why please, anybody, give me some sort of explanation as to why the commissioner, who we already have problems with, would choose Clay Holmes over Craig Kimbrell. Now, the only thing that Oriole fans need to account for why Clay Holmes should have a legitimate edge that should overpower all these other categories and factors that I just mentioned. What's that edge that Clay Holmes has? He's a Yankee. He is on the New York Yankees, and Craig Kimbrell is in the unfortunate position of being on the Baltimore Orioles, not in the biggest money market team that exists in Major League Baseball. Now, I don't actually know why uh, Clay Holmes was selected. I don't know if there was corruption there or, oh, maybe Juan Soto and Aaron Judge and, are not enough for Yankee fans to watch the All-Star game. So we need to add Clay Holmes to this American League roster to boost up the New York viewership of the All-Star game. I don't know enough to actually make a claim like that. And I'm not genuinely accusing uh Major League Baseball in this particular situation of any particular corruption. I think I have levied other charges of corruption against them in the past. On this particular decision, I am not charging them with corruption. But what I am saying is that this selection is completely unjustifiable. Oriole fans should be very, very, have a lot of righteous anger and emotion about this decision and about not seeing Craig Kimbrell at the All-Star game, or to be more precise, at seeing Craig Kimbrell be replaced by Clay Holmes at this All-Star game. So anyway, yeah, so the one thing that I will maybe say about this Orioles team, so we're disappointed that we're only sending 3 players to the All-Star game. We are not like the Royals back whenever it was, when they basically had the entire team starting the All-Star game. So the Orioles and Oriole fans are in an unfortunate situation. I will say I do think a little bit of what happens here relates to the conversation that I had about power in my last episode. My last episode, not our last episode, my last episode, the episode that I did last. Um, so what I would say is that, basically one of the arguments I was making was that the Orioles were doing so well in the power department because we were getting production from every facet of the players on our team, and everybody was making a contribution in the power department. And I would say the same exact thing about this Orioles team, right? So even though we do have a couple stars. Well, let's be clear. We have 3 All-Stars, which is very good. We have Corbin Burns, Gunnar Henderson, an absolute star, and Adley Rutschman, an absolute star. Now, Burns is an absolute star too, but he doesn't feel as much hours as Rutschman and as Henderson do, right? We have much more. I think it's fair to say, I think Oriole fans have much more emotional attachment to both of them, just because hopefully they're going to be on the team for a long time. And they have been on the team longer than Corbin Burns has. Corbin Burns is likely to be gone at the end of the year. So we have a lot more emotional attachment to the both of them. But even with that said, it is important to say that, you know, even if the Orioles don't send a bunch of All-Stars to the All-Star game, the Orioles have an amazing and incredible team. And we have that team because we have a lot of very good players, and we have very few holes and weaknesses on this team that are able to be exploited. So, of course, we have had people struggle. That's no doubt. But overall, if you're looking at this team collectively, this is a very well rounded, balanced team overall. Now, I know there are problems in the bullpen. I know that Cedric Mullins has not been Cedric Mullins in center field. I know that Austin Hayes, even though he's starting to get a little better and hit a little better, has not been himself. And I know that Colton Cowser, despite clearly having a lot of potential, has struggled in the past couple months or so. So I know that we don't have. This is the Orioles are not an all-star team. We have 3 All-Stars on this team, which is commendable, which we should be excited about. But we are not a really, really good team because we have a bunch of superstars on this team, and we are going to ride, just like the Mariners attempted to do, riding Randy Johnson, Ken Griffey Jr., and Alex Rodriguez, right? The Yankees went out, got Juan Soto. Let's just get a superstar and add them to our team, and hopefully we're gonna have enough superstars and we're gonna just win the World Series, right? The Orioles are not going that route. The Orioles, in a different universe, could have had more All-Stars. We could have had Kyle Bradish. We could have had Grayson Rodriguez. Maybe we could have had Mountcastle and Santander. Maybe O'Hearn would have got in there, but we didn't. And we don't need to have superstars. Baseball is, after all, a team game, right? So even though we do have superstars at core positions, Mullen should be a superstar. He's not doing that right now. At the key position of center field, we have a superstar catcher, at shortstop, and our ace is a superstar, right? But we don't need a bunch of superstars to be a good team. We don't need to, have to be validated by the All-Star game, right? We don't need that to validate who we are as a team, and for us to judge our long-term abilities based on how many all-stars we have. We have a very good team because we're well-rounded, because everybody makes contributions to this team, and we have very, very few weaknesses that are really, really plaguing the Orioles and dragging the Orioles down. So we are getting production from everywhere, and that makes us great beyond just the number of all-stars that this team has. We have to remember, even though the All-Star game is about, sort of celebrating talent and recognizing talent and putting an exhibition on and that sort of thing and all these great things, at the end of the day, baseball is a team game, and we can't get caught up and swept up in, the number of all stars that we are sending, even though we do want our guys to be recognized, nationally and to play on that big stage. I get that, right? But we can't be so bogged down in it that it eradicates and takes away from baseball being a team sport. And of course, I feel like in this moment, it is appropriate to quote Buck Showalter and to say that even though we have only 3 people going to the All-Star game, I like our guys. So with that, we will wrap up the episode here. I got into a conversation. I was just home for a few days. I got into that's why I was in a different setting in the background. I got into a conversation with my brother about whether I should do a virtual background. Um, I guess I will finish that conversation with him because we got interrupted and then never returned to it. I will also consult Tyler and see his thoughts and opinions. But if you have thoughts and opinions on whether I should have a virtual background, please let me know. Feel free to email us, comment on this video, say your background. That's disgusting. I want a virtual one. Say anything you want. That's cool. I can accept it. And just let me know if you prefer the virtual background. I'm naturally inclined against it just because of the fakeness of it, I guess. But if it would make it a more pleasant viewing experience for the audience, please let me know and I will adjust properly. So thank you. Please like and subscribe to the show. Give us a 5-star rating and review. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Like this video if you watched it on YouTube. Feel free to comment any thoughts on the YouTube video below, any thoughts, analysis, ideas that you may have, or email your thoughts to thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at thewarehousepod. And in any case, that's all for the show. Thank you all so much for thank you all so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.